What a minute, folks, what a minute.
It's a very interesting occupation, as I say, whenever you think of an egg and think that that there is produced out of an egg.
Isn't it extraordinary still, isn't it?
With brain, bones, fluff and everything else.
Yeah, yeah. They lost the coffin.
They lost the coffin. They misplaced it. And they had to be sent back again to look
They
for
got
it.
drunk, in other words.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I've got two wee... You know what you need for this? Eyesight.
Yeah.
Eyesight would be brilliant for it.
You can feel the weight of that.
Absolutely.
You imagine you walking around and throw those two on your head, and all of a sudden one drops off.
Right.
You're going to go like that.
So there's absolutely no way that you can... even if you have the key, you can't...
And then this is a wind-up. A wind-up bell.
A wind-up
bell.
Hello, we were just passing by. Just thought I'd call in and say hello to you. Yeah. The man who wrote one of the greatest imaginative works ever written, Gulliver's Travels, was no mean traveller himself, though his travels seem to have been of the restless, fidgety, unable to settle anywhere comfortably type. Dean Swift was, by his own admission, not an easy man to please, and the best compliment he could pay to your abode was to come and stay with you for a week, or two, or three. He must have liked this place because he stayed long enough to beat a path along this stream and lend his name to features of the landscape. Long enough to drink deep of its charms and pen a poem, or two, or three. Long enough, we suspect, even to fall in love yet again. So yes, I think he was comfortable here. And who could blame him? Welcome to the Speckled Hill, the parish of Mullabrack in County Armagh. The civil parish of Mullabrack contains within its boundaries a number of places or features which are, perhaps in their own right, somewhat more familiar sounding than the parish itself. Among these you'll find the town of Market Hill, as neat a description in terms of topography and function as you could imagine. The market trade still flourishes in cheerful fashion, and the streets are crowded with the architecture of a more gracious age. Elegant examples of Georgian charm which local people have refurbished with ingenuity and pride, and pressed into service for the benefit of the 21st century community. In the past, you might have come here, or indeed been brought here, to be fined or sentenced. But nowadays, the old courthouse serves out food, nursery care, and educational courses. Equally familiar to many will be the nearby Gosford Forest Park. 600 acres of trees, deer park and rare breeds. A substantial glimpse of paradise for caravanning families and nature lovers who love their nature accessible and child-friendly. But the parkland and the forest were originally conceived as adornments to Gosford Castle, the neo-Norman ancestral pile of the Atchison family, heirs of Gosford since 1806, who were granted 1,000 acres of prime Armagh by James I at the time of the plantation of Ulster. This 19th century version of their place in the country was in its day the biggest single residence in Ireland. But Mullabrack is a parish of great antiquity, much of which is contained within, beneath and around the site of the present St. John's Church of Ireland Parish Church. My guide through much of the past 1,500 years of Mullabrack history is Mary McHugh, who tells me that this was most likely a rath housing an early Christian settlement, then a monastic foundation in early medieval times run by the Culdee monks of Armagh, then a place of continuous worship of one form or another for the next 1,000 years or so. This is probably the 5th church to be built on the Rath, and it contains the vaults and memorial tablets of the two important planter families of the area, the Hamiltons of Hamilton's Bawn and the Atchisons of Market Hill. Apart from the tower, this is largely a Victorian structure, about which Mary has quite strong views.
It fell victim to a restoring rector in the 1800s. And he changed what was a lovely, simple cruciform church, which really had existed from the restoration of Charles II right through the 17th, 18th centuries until the Reverend Dr. Samuel Blacker got his hands on it.
Right, so it was the Reverend Dr. Blacker who actually
created the shape of it as it is now, more or less.
It was indeed.
But he would say that he's entitled to, because he put his hand in his own pocket, really, to do a lot of that.
He certainly did. He was a very wealthy man in his own right.
I see, yes.
And he spent over £1,000 on rebuilding the church in the 1800s and, well, turning it in to what it is today.
So £1,000 when he was spending it would be
a lot of
huge amount of money, isn't that the case?
Yes, indeed.
Shudder to think what it'd be worth these days. But did he get his money's worth, do you think, anyway? I detect from your tone you're not entirely happy with the fact that it changes from a cruciform shape to what it is now at the present day.
No, I would have loved it if we could have preserved the church of the 17th and 18th centuries.
Okay.
But, well...
Well, we'll see what he's done by going inside, anyway, shall we?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Inside, the squareness of the church, built by Samuel Blacker to accommodate a burgeoning congregation in the early 1800s, is pretty obvious, as are the various memorial tablets and plaques to the Hamiltons, the Atchisons, and even the Reverend Blacker's own family. Where Mary and I are standing would be the original holy ground, whereon stood early hermits, Culdee monks, and in the early 1700s, according to the records, Dean Jonathan Swift.
He preached but once.
Just once?
So he told one of his publishers.
Right. We have no idea what he said on the day or anything like that. No record.
None
of
whatsoever.
It.
In fact, our only record of Swift's activities in this area in those long summers of 1728, 29 and 30 would be from a lovely group of 14 of his poems, now called the Market Hill Poems.
Right.
And it's from these that we learn about the things he got up to.
I see, right. Was he fond of the place? It sounds like he was.
Yes.
Yeah.
He seemed to be extremely fond of it until his relationship with Sir Arthur soured.
I see, right.
And it all ended rather abruptly with the breakup of the Atchisons' marriage.
I see.
And the swift departure of Anne Atchison, Sir Arthur's wife, and Swift to Dublin.
Oh, right.
And I think we've got to remember that when Swift came here during those years, the two great loves of his life, Vanessa and Stella, were already dead.
I see.
And I suppose, in a sense, Anne Atchison and other women whom he would have encountered were replacement figures, in a way.
There was a vacancy, in other words.
Yes.
I see, yes.
Incidentally, over here we have a fine bust by Jan van Nost, the famous sculptor of the period, of Sir Arthur Atchison himself.
Right.
And it's quite amusing if we read the epitaph on that.
Yeah.
Though qualified to shine in courts and high places, he contented himself in fulfilling the role of a rural gentleman. Now, that's very much at variance with what Swift wrote about him in the poems.
Really, right.
Such is the fate of Gosford's knight, who keeps his wisdom out of sight, whose uncommunicative heart can scarce one precious word impart. His guests are few, his visits rare, nor uses time, nor time will spare. Nor rides, nor walks, nor hunts, nor fowls, nor plays at cards, or dice, or bowls. But seated in an easy chair, despises exercise and air.
Wonderful.
Two things become apparent. One is that you'd sooner keep Jonathan Swift a week rather than a fortnight, and that Mary McHugh has encyclopedic knowledge of the history of Mullabrack Church and all who sailed in her. I spent a long time with Mary, hearing fascinating story after story and exploring the ancient artefacts and adornments of worship which testified to the church's antiquity.
It is wonderful to think that Swift might have placed his arms in this dish.
He himself, yes. And it would have made, I noticed, because it's made of copper, it makes quite a clatter if you put any coins into the thing. It's not the idea. So it wouldn't be a silent collection, in other words.
Oh no,
if it's put onto your nose and you didn't put anything into it, it would be quite noticeable by the rest of it. I just happen to find myself totally embarrassed. I don't even have a penny on me at the present time to put in here, but there you go. And this is a replica of the church as it would have appeared
as it
at
was,
that time.
yes.
Right.
as it was in 1695, and indeed as it was from the Restoration period right through until Dr. Blacker's time.
That's unusual to have such a caravan on a paten and on a chalice of the church itself.
It's most unusual and very precious to us, needless to say.
I couldn't leave the church without getting Mary to tell a famous and rather sad story associated with Mullabrack. It concerns the unrequited love that Samuel Colliston, a farm labourer, had for a farmer's daughter called Annie Dobbin. Samuel was besotted with Annie, dogged her footsteps, wrote songs and poems about her, stalked her, you might say, but Annie didn't want to know. It all came to a head at the evening service on a winter's night on the 17th of January 1864.
And it was the senior curate, the Reverend Arthur Irwin, who was both conducting the service and preaching the sermon. And as Mr. Irwin moved up into the pulpit, there was a loud cry from the church gallery, and Colliston screamed out, "There is no love in her heart for me, and I can live no longer." And then there was the sound of pistol fire, as Colliston fired 3 shots, not at himself significantly, but towards the roof of the church.
He didn't fire at her or himself.
No.
He wasn't attempting to injure anybody. No?
He was an attention seeker, Joe. I think that was it.
Yeah.
Well, you can imagine the chaos that prevailed down below. Women fainted, which was quite the proper thing for females to do in
Probably
those
a few men
days.
fainted as well. Everybody,
Very possibly some ran out into the churchyard in the pitch dark. Others sat rooted to their
But
pews.
they had no idea what was going on, of course.
No.
No.
The preacher, the Reverend Arthur Irwin, and the 2 church wardens went up to the gallery, where they apprehended Colliston and handed him over to the police.
Right.
There must have been a considerable degree of sympathy for Colliston, for he received what even nowadays we would regard as the very lenient sentence of only 2 months' imprisonment. He never recovered from his obsession, we're told, nor, tragically, did Annie. Neither married, and Mary was able to show me the recorded death of Samuel Colliston in 1911, aged 71, and that of Annie Dobbin, who died in the year 1919, aged 78 years. 1 love unrequited, 2 lives wasted. A tale that would be better told by Emily Bronte than Jonathan Swift, I think you'll agree. When we come back, we have more tales to tell, some with happier outcomes perhaps. The family vaults of the Atchisons and the Hamiltons, as we've heard, are part of the fabric of the Mullabrack church building itself. In centuries past, it would seem, the proximity of your final resting place to the actual church was often a measure of your wealth and standing in the community.
They say that death is a great leveller, that we're all equal once we're laid to rest under the sod. But even in death, of course, some of us are accorded more importance than others. In times gone by, the amount that you were prepared to pay dictated where you could be buried in the graveyard. The most expensive seats, so to speak, were those nearest the church. And here at Mullabrack in earlier centuries, they would have cost you £1. Those in the middle section, a bit further away from the church, 10 shillings. Whilst the cheapest seats were those on the perimeter of the graveyard, furthest away from the church, and they would have cost you a mere 5 shillings. Where I'm standing, all you can see for the most part are the backs of headstones, the inscriptions being on the other side. That's because, of course, they're all buried looking eastward, that they may face the rising sun. All that is, except one, which is facing this way. This is the grave of the Reverend Canon W.G. Kerr, and he's buried in an equally strong tradition, which states that the minister should always be facing his flock.
Canon Kerr was rector of Mullabrack, and he and his wife Nora were the parents of Colin Kerr. Colin and his wife Rosaline now live in Mullabrack House, built as his very own rectory back in 1829 by the aforementioned Reverend Samuel Blacker. Perhaps he had a better architect this time. Now you might think that because Colin is the son of another rector, that he's living here somehow by way of succession. Not that simple, I'm afraid. The house was bought by Colin's maternal grandfather way back in the 1920s, and Colin and Rosaline inherited it from an uncle in 1997, by which stage it was in a pretty run-down state. Since then, it's been a labour of love and expense.
Oh, it needed a lot of work.
Really?
We re-roofed it, rewired it, replumbed it, and put in central heating, so that took a few years.
So you're bringing it into the
And
20th
then-
century, really, would you?
And then it all had to be redecorated, because every wall was tracked down for wiring. And
Floorboards lifted. And
floorboards lifted, then everything had to be
Yes,
redecorated.
yes.
So we spent a good while doing that.
But you have it back in the style in which it was,
Oh, it's in the
first
same-
conceived, in other words. You think
Bits
so?
of it, bits of it.
well, you
Yes.
can't live in the